Have you ever imagined what it feels like to be completely surrounded by darkness, with only the faint glimmer of your own light revealing the path ahead, but knowing that one wrong move could be the last mistake you ever make? Most people go through life thinking danger is something they can see, hear, or touch. But what if the greatest threats are the ones lurking silently, hidden behind layers of stone, ice, and water, places humans were never meant to tread? Tonight, you're about to hear 3 stories that test the limits of courage, sanity, and survival. The first begins in the icy, submerged depths of northern Europe, in a cave so treacherous that even the most experienced divers trembled at the thought of entering it. This is not just a story of adventure. It's a story of obsession, terror, and the unforgiving grip of nature when it decides it's done playing games. On February 6, 2014, a team of Finnish cavers arrived in Norway with excitement and nervous anticipation. They had trained, planned, and visualized this dive hundreds of times. The target was Plura Cave, a submerged labyrinth that, for all intents and purposes, seemed as alive as it was cold, silent, and unwelcoming. Among them was Kai Konkinen, a diver whose experience was both his greatest strength and the source of haunting memories. Only a year earlier, he had lost his longtime friend and diving partner in an accident that had left him questioning the risks of the sport he loved. Yet, here he was, back in a foreign country, preparing to plunge into what many considered one of Europe's deadliest underwater caves. The team of 5 elite divers, Kai, Patrick Rankfist, Jari Hewitt-Taranen, Jari Uzumaki, and Vesa Rantin, stood around a triangular hole cut into the ice of the Plura River. The air was crisp and merciless, the icy wind cutting through their thermal layers. Their plan was meticulous: 2 groups, a staggered start, and careful attention to visibility. Patrick and Jari H. would go first, using underwater scooters to conserve energy and allow sediment to settle. Kai, Jari U, and Vesa would follow 2 hours later. Descending into Plura was like entering another world. The initial meters of the dive were almost serene. The cold water enveloped them, the light from their headlamps cutting through the darkness like thin knives. At 34 meters, they reached a partially flooded air chamber, a brief respite before the abyss. For a fleeting moment, optimism flickered. They allowed themselves the illusion that the mission might proceed without incident. But Plura had other plans. The next section narrowed abruptly, forcing divers to squeeze through a passage barely wide enough for fully geared bodies. Patrick went first, carefully feeling the walls with his hands, every movement deliberate. Suddenly, Jari H's flashlight began to flicker violently, and panic spread across the dark waters. His bailout cylinder was caught, immobilizing him in the icy grip of the cave. Patrick swam back to assist, shifting the cylinder enough to free him, but it was too late. The regulator had come loose, and Jari H's lungs had already filled with water. The first death had occurred. Patrick could not scream. He could not stop to mourn. He had to focus on survival. His dive computer flashed a grim number: 400 minutes of decompression to avoid sickness. Would have been a 5-hour dive, now promised 9, possibly more. He turned away from his friend's lifeless body, swimming toward the second entrance with a mix of dread and determination. 2 hours later, the second team entered the cave. The horror repeated itself. Vesa encountered Jari H's body, the narrow passage leaving no choice but to move past it. Jari panicked, unable to control his breathing in the freezing, tight confines. Kai tried to calm him, but panic underwater is a death sentence, and Jari succumbed. Kai returned alone, convinced all hope was lost for Vesa. Yet, by sheer will, Vesa pushed forward, and the 3 survivors eventually emerged at different points, each believing they were alone. Patrick and Vesa reached the dry chamber of Stein Ula Flag first, exhausted and numb, while Kai broke through the icy surface hours later. Together, all 3 regrouped, marking the end of a dive that had tested every limit of human endurance and courage. Plura Cave had claimed lives and left indelible trauma in those who survived, a stark reminder that nature has no mercy and some environments are designed to kill without prejudice. The tragedy of Plura was just the beginning. 4 years later, a new descent would rival this nightmare. The Varolganit Cave in Abkhazia, plunging over 2,200 meters into the earth. Fewer humans had reached its depths than had been into space. Led by Pavel Demidov, the team prepared not only for physical challenges, but for psychological ones. The goal was simple: document, photograph, and survive. But even with months of planning, Varolganit would not yield easily. Descending over 4 days, hauling 30 kilograms of gear through twisting tunnels, freezing chambers, and muddy passages, the team finally reached the deepest camp. For 6 days, they explored, taking measurements and photographing the surreal turquoise lake at the bottom. Life in total darkness persisted in the form of shrimp, scorpions, and other species never before cataloged. But the calm ended abruptly on day 7. A flood, sudden and violent, surged into the cave, the water a merciless force capable of drowning even the most experienced caver. Robbie Shawn, a British cave photographer, sprang into action, navigating through freezing torrents while his companions followed. Every movement required precision. Hesitation meant death. Hours later, they reached higher ground, eventually reuniting with the remaining Russian cavers. After 4 more days of grueling ascent, the team emerged, alive but profoundly changed. While Plura and Varolganit tested physical and mental limits, the story of Ted's cave was a lesson in the unknown. In 2001, Ted and his friend B discovered a remote cave with a hole too narrow for comfort. The howling wind, grinding sounds, and the dog's refusal to enter hinted at something unnatural. Their efforts to explore the space revealed strange hieroglyphic-like markings, a large, impossibly round stone, and the sense that they were not alone. The strange sounds and moving stone suggested a presence, something intelligent, malevolent, or incomprehensible. Even with technology and companions, the cave seemed to react to their intrusion, driving Ted to document the experience before disappearing from the internet. The Plura, Varolganit, and Ted's cave illustrate a singular truth. Some environments are alive in ways we cannot fully understand. They are patient, indifferent, and capable of destroying the unprepared. For those who enter without respect, they are deadly teachers, showing in the harshest terms that survival is never guaranteed. Cave diving, extreme exploration, or venturing into the unknown is not a test of bravery alone. It is a negotiation with forces beyond human comprehension. And for those who have faced such trials, the memory of water-filled passages, narrow tunnels, or unexplained phenomena lingers long after the surface is reached. Plura's icy grip, Varolganit's relentless torrents, and Ted's unnerving encounter in darkness serve as eternal reminders. Beneath the Earth's crust lie places that will challenge not just the body, but the very will to survive. It started as a typical summer trek, the kind of adventure people romanticize in Instagram posts and travel magazines. Dense forests, rugged mountain trails, and the promise of breathtaking views at the summit. What could possibly go wrong? But sometimes, nature has a way of rewriting the rules, and some trails are more than just paths through the trees. They are corridors into fear, into the unknown, into stories people whisper about but never dare explore themselves. I was 25 at the time, and hiking had been my escape for years. I wasn't a professional, just someone who loved the outdoors. My friends and I had planned this trip to the Blackwood Mountains for months. Rumors of missing hikers and strange occurrences had circulated in the local area. But like most people do when they're young and full of confidence, we dismissed them as overblown campfire stories. The group consisted of 5 of us: myself, Anna, my older brother Daniel, and our friends Mark and Leah. We arrived at the trailhead mid-morning, loaded with backpacks, tents, and enough supplies to last 3 days. The forest was alive, birds calling, wind rustling the leaves, and a river running alongside the trail. Everything seemed idyllic. By the end of the first day, we had reached a clearing where we set up camp. We laughed, shared stories, and roasted marshmallows over a small fire. The mountain seemed peaceful, almost welcoming. But as darkness fell, a subtle tension crept in, an unnatural stillness. The usual night sounds, insects buzzing or owls hooting, were faint. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Around midnight, I woke to a noise that didn't belong to the forest, a low, almost imperceptible scratching coming from beyond our campsite. At first, I thought it was a bear, but the sound was different. It moved in patterns that no animal could replicate. It scratched along the ground, then paused, then moved closer, circling us. I shook it off as nerves and went back to sleep, but the unease lingered. The next morning, Anna noticed something odd. The trail we had taken in seemed altered. Branches we had pushed aside were snapped back into place. Rocks that had been moved to mark our path were missing. Daniel joked about it being a forest troll, but I could feel the hair on my arms stand up. Something about the forest was wrong. We pressed on, determined to reach the summit by noon. The trail narrowed, steep cliffs looming on one side and a sheer drop on the other. The deeper we went, the denser the forest became. The sunlight barely penetrated the canopy, and the shadows stretched unnaturally. By the time we stopped for lunch, a thick fog had begun to roll in, cutting visibility to just a few meters. Mark, always the skeptic, laughed it off. Fog happens. Mountains happen. Nothing creepy about that, he said. But even he was quiet after a while, scanning the foggy woods nervously. It felt as though the forest itself was watching us, shifting subtly whenever we looked away. The first disappearance happened just after lunch. Leah had wandered a few meters ahead, trying to take a photo of the fog weaving through the trees. We called her name, but she didn't respond. At first, we thought she was joking, hiding for fun, but when we reached her spot, she was gone. Her backpack, camera, and water bottle remained untouched, as if she had simply vanished. Panic set in. We called her name repeatedly, shouting until our voices cracked, but there was no answer. The fog seemed to swallow sound, making our shouts echo unnaturally before fading. Daniel wanted to turn back, but the trail ahead was now invisible, and the map didn't match the terrain. Every direction looked the same: trees, fog, shadows. The forest was playing tricks on us, and we didn't know which way led out. Hours passed. The forest grew colder, dampness seeping into our bones. We realized that we were lost. Not just lost, but being drawn deeper into the mountain by something we couldn't see. The trail markers we had set seemed gone, or worse, rearranged. Panic and exhaustion made our minds play tricks, but there were too many signs. Leah's abandoned gear, the shifting fog, the strange scratches in the mud that weren't animal tracks. By evening, hunger and fear had taken their toll. We set up camp in a small clearing, huddled around a fire. That night, the noises returned: low scratches, whispers, and something else breathing. Not ours, not human, but close enough that it made our hearts pound. We stayed in a tight circle, packs between our legs, eyes scanning the trees for movement. Hours passed without incident. Then, just as sleep began to claim us, a scream pierced the night. Daniel's. We bolted upright, but he wasn't there. The fire illuminated the fog in erratic flickers. We could see shadows moving in the mist, faster than any human could run. Daniel's backpack lay where he had been sitting. Panic turned to terror as we realized what was happening. The mountain didn't want us here. We grabbed whatever we could carry and ran blindly into the fog. Branches clawed at our faces, roots tripped us, rocks cut our hands and legs, but we didn't stop. Behind us, the low scratching and whispering followed. The sound seemed to twist and warp around the trees, coming from everywhere at once. Hours later, exhausted and bleeding, we stumbled upon a stream. We followed it, hoping it would lead us to civilization. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing strange formations in the rocks. Natural, but unervingly symmetrical. We crossed the stream, only to find a series of footprints in the mud. They weren't ours. They were deep, long, and ended abruptly in the middle of the stream. No one had crossed, yet the impressions were perfect. The sun began to rise, and with it, the forest seemed to change. Trees we had passed days earlier were now in impossible places, forming corridors that hadn't existed. Rocks formed faces in the light. Shadows that had been attached to nothing were now stalking us. Every step forward felt like walking through a living nightmare. By nightfall on the second day, only 3 of us remained. Anna, Mark, and me. Leah and Daniel were gone. The forest had claimed them, and we knew it wasn't accidental. We realized something vital. We weren't lost by chance. The mountain, or whatever was inhabiting it, was guiding us, pushing us into corridors, leading us to the summit, or to death. On the third day, we reached a plateau. It was the summit, but instead of relief, the view filled us with dread. From here, the mountains spread out endlessly, a patchwork of fog, shadows, and impossible rock formations. And at the edge of the plateau, something moved. It was humanoid, but distorted. Too tall, too thin, with limbs bending at unnatural angles. Its head tilted at impossible degrees, watching us moving without sound. For a brief moment, our minds refused to comprehend it. Then, in unison, we turned and ran. The descent became a blur of panic. Every shadow a potential predator. We survived, somehow finding a ranger's cabin far below the plateau. Exhausted, soaked, and terrified, we called for help. Weeks later, searches for Leah and Daniel yielded nothing. The forest, the mountain, had swallowed them. No tracks, no evidence, nothing but whispers and stories told by those who had seen them before. Locals avoided the Blackwood Mountains after that. Hikers vanished every few years, always in the same patterns. Bright day, thick fog, sudden disappearance, and a trail of eerie signs left behind. Some claimed the mountain was cursed. Others spoke of an ancient entity living in the depths, punishing those who dared explore its heart. For me, the trauma lingered long after my body healed. The whispers haunted my dreams. The shadows followed me in reflections. And even now, years later, I cannot explain the shapes I saw, the sounds I heard, or the inexplicable presence that seemed to guide the forest. The Blackwood Mountains are alive, and they remember. Those who enter are never truly alone. And for anyone thinking about hiking, exploring, or venturing into unknown wilderness, remember this. The forest doesn't care about your courage, your preparation, or your life. It only cares that you follow its rules, or it will teach you a lesson in a way you will never forget. I was 23 when I first set foot in Hollow Manor, a sprawling estate that had been abandoned for decades. The locals whispered about it in hushed tones, how the original owners disappeared one night, how the windows sometimes glowed with candlelight despite being empty, and how anyone who spent the night inside never returned the same. But I didn't care. I was chasing stories, and Hollow Manor promised the most chilling one of all. I had been researching abandoned places for years, documenting them for my blog and YouTube channel. Hollow Manor had a reputation: decrepit, dangerous, and haunted, or so the stories went. That was enough for me. With my camera gear, a flashlight, and a sense of invincibility, I arrived at the iron gates at dusk. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and rot. The gates were rusted, swinging open with an almost reluctant groan as I pushed them. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the calm quiet of a forest or a deserted town, but the kind of silence that presses against your ears, making every small sound. The snap of a twig, the flutter of a crow's wing, louder than it should be. The mansion loomed ahead, windows like dark eyes watching me. I stepped inside. Dust coated everything. The air was cold, unnaturally cold for a late spring evening. I turned on my flashlight, sweeping the beam across faded wallpaper, broken furniture, and cracked portraits of faces that seemed to watch me move. There was an oppressive heaviness in the air, a weight that made my chest ache. I set up my camera in the main hall and began filming, narrating to my unseen audience. Hollow Manor, I whispered, has been abandoned for nearly 50 years, yet something lingers here, something that doesn't want to be forgotten. The first hour passed without incident. I explored the ground floor, the dining room, the library, the kitchen where pots still hung on hooks, as if waiting for a meal that would never come. I reached the staircase leading to the second floor when I first heard it, a faint echo like footsteps pacing in the hall above me. I froze. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight, but the echo didn't match my movement. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" My voice sounded wrong, muffled, as though the walls themselves absorbed it. Silence answered me. I shook it off, telling myself it was my imagination. Hollow Manor was old. Floors creaked. Shadows played tricks. But as night fell, the manor began to shift. The walls seemed closer, the ceilings lower. Hallways stretched impossibly long. Doors that I had seen clearly before now appeared in places they shouldn't exist, leading to rooms that weren't on any floor plan. My camera battery drained faster than it should have, the flashlight flickering intermittently, as though the house itself was feeding on my fear. It started with whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind through broken windows, but the whispering grew distinct, urgent. Words I couldn't understand, voices overlapping, sometimes soft, sometimes a scream echoing through the walls. My heart raced. I turned corners slowly, flashlight trembling, only to find empty rooms staring back at me. Then I saw it. Or them. Shadows. Not shadows cast by objects, but dark forms moving independently, crawling along the walls and ceilings. They were thin, humanoid, with distorted limbs, moving silently, watching. They never came close, but I could feel them, pressure at the edge of perception, a cold presence brushing against my spine. I tried to leave. I ran down the main hall to the front door. It wouldn't open. Not jammed, not locked, just impossible to move. The mansion seemed to resist me, bending reality like it was a living thing. Panic set in. My breaths were short, shallow, my hands shaking so violently I dropped my camera. Hours, or maybe minutes. Later, I calmed enough to explore again, knowing that standing still would only make the house consume me. I climbed the stairs to the upper floors, each step echoing unnaturally loud, as though announcing my arrival. The second floor was worse. Portraits stared with more intensity now, eyes following me with a sentience that chilled me. The air smelled of decay and iron, and I realized I could hear my own heartbeat in a way that was almost loud enough to hurt. In the master bedroom, I found a journal, old and brittle, its cover coated with dust. The pages were filled with frantic handwriting, detailing the last days of the manor's owners. Mentions of voices, shadows, dreams where the walls moved, and people who vanished within the house itself. One entry made my blood run cold. The house feeds on fear. It remembers everything. If you hear it whisper your name, do not answer. If you see the shadows move, do not follow. The house takes what it wants, and the more you resist, the hungrier it becomes. I laughed nervously, trying to convince myself it was just a story. But as I read, I heard my name, soft, almost intimate, carried through the hallways. I froze. "Who's there?" I shouted. No reply, only a shift in the shadows around me. Then I saw a figure in the doorway, a silhouette impossibly thin, head tilting unnaturally to the side. Its eyes glowed faintly, red like embers. It stepped forward without a sound. I stumbled backward, tripping over furniture, heart pounding so violently I thought it would burst. My flashlight fell, casting its last beam on the figure before going dark. I ran, blindly navigating the warped hallways, doors opening into impossible corridors. The whispers became louder, forming words I could almost understand, mocking me, calling me home, telling me to join them. I felt hands brush against my arms. Not real, I told myself, but the sensation was unmistakable. My skin crawled. The shadows moved with me, surrounding me. Hours, or maybe days, passed. Time had no meaning. My sense of direction evaporated. I had no idea where I was or how many floors I had crossed. The shadows seemed patient, waiting, studying me. I slept, if it could be called sleep, on the cold floor, only to awaken to the same whispers, the same crawling darkness. At some point, I realized I wasn't alone in my fear. Faces appeared in mirrors that didn't exist. Children laughing, men screaming, women crying, all trapped within the reflective surfaces of the mansion, as if the house stored them. I understood then that Hollow Manor didn't just haunt, it collected, and I was being added to its collection. I found another room, smaller, with a single door that seemed untouched by the mansion's distortion. I forced it open and stumbled into a room lit by an otherworldly glow. Candles burned along the walls, though there was no wax dripping, no smell of smoke. In the center lay a stone slab, carved with symbols I didn't recognize, pulsing faintly. The whispers coalesced into a single voice, my own, echoing in the room. I ran forward, desperate, reaching the door on the far side, thinking it was my exit. But as I touched the handle, the slab pulsed, and the room shifted. I was no longer in the same floor. The walls had moved, the ceiling lowered. The shadows pressed closer, reaching for me. Panic became a tool of survival. I ran, zigzagging through hallways that bent physics, chased by darkness that was alive. I lost track of time entirely. My flashlight was dead. My camera broken. My phone useless. My only guide was my will to survive. I stumbled into a room I recognized, the main hall. But it wasn't the same hall I had entered. The portraits were now missing, replaced by mirrors. My reflection was wrong. It moved independently, smiling when I wasn't, blinking when I didn't. I screamed. My reflection screamed with me. Then the walls of the hall began to pulse like lungs breathing, expanding and contracting. I ran to the nearest exit, the front door. It opened this time, but the forest outside was not the same. Trees twisted impossibly, shadows moving like living things. Something whispered, "Stay," and the voice carried love, hate, and hunger all at once. I didn't. I ran. When I finally stumbled into the real forest outside, dawn was breaking. The air was normal. Birds sang. The morning sun warmed my skin. I was free, or so I thought. My friends had warned me about obsession, about pushing limits, about the unknown. Hollow Manor had taught me all of that, and more. Weeks later, I returned home, only to find subtle signs of the manor had followed me. Shadows at the edge of my vision. Whispers at night. Reflections that lingered too long in mirrors. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I see that pulsing slab, the glowing symbols and the shadows waiting, patient, hungry. I have never gone back, and I never will. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. Hollow Manor is still out there, alive, waiting for the next curious soul foolish enough to enter.